Okay, for our next panel discussion, we will be exploring fueling business growth with data-driven leadership. So we're going to see where we are in 2022 to 2023 with data, advanced analytics, AI, and ML initiatives, and automation. Data competency for CIO of the future, revisiting big data management strategy in a complex hybrid landscape. Data as an ecosystem, and sorry, technology just failed on me. I just lost a page. Okay, so creating value through data with data monetizing strategy and delivering tangible initiatives for data prioritization, ensuring data-driven culture and data governance program. Our moderator for this panel is Ritin Mathur, partner for consulting in Ernst & Young Advisory. And our three panelists for the session is Ms. Juliana Chua, Senior Director, Global Digital Acceleration, Mr. Siew Kit, Vice President for Technology and IT for Singapore Cruise Center, and Mr. Rajesh Nandakumar, Head of Technology Asia Singapore for WESTPAC Institutional Banking. Can I please invite our moderator and panelists on stage? Thank you.
Just checking on the mic. Just a mic check. Audible? Yeah. All right. Good morning, everyone, again, and welcome to the second panel discussion. This is about data centricity and how it can help power business growth. And data centricity is certainly a topic which is on the agenda of many IT leaders and CIOs, and the group here will attest to having had discussions around enabling the business to use data more effectively. In the time that we have today, we'll share some aspects of what it means to be a data-driven organization, and the panelists will share some of their experiences from the work that they've done. And perhaps, to lay some foundation first and address the question of what it means to be a data-driven enterprise, and maybe starting with you first, Rajesh, your current focus is driving customer-centric data insight programs. Yeah. What does it mean from a customer perspective?
Yeah, good. Thanks for this question, and good morning, folks. It's nice to be with this larger crowd, and it's, we've spent 3 years of virtual calls and sessions. I was outside talking to CFOs, and that's what the CIOs do, right? Spend more time with the CFOs so they give you the money. The thing we were talking about actually resonates from there in terms of if you're flying, because now the borders have opened up, you started to fly. And we were talking in the context of why Singapore Airlines is so special compared to other airlines, right? Not controversial one, but we have a love towards Singapore Airlines, why we always pick that. And if I go to a cafe shop, right, and I go always to the same cafe shop, pre-COVID, and now I do that because it's still there, and the person behind the counter knows exactly the coffee that I order every day. I don't need to tell him I need this coffee, right? And exactly the perfect temperament. You walk into the branch, somebody addresses you by saying, Mr. Raj, thank you for so much being here, right? You're calling into a call center, right? You don't call for joy, right? You're getting bored, you want to call it a call center. There's a context as to why you're calling. And the data should be provided to your front line and enabling them to service your customers better. And that's where it's more important. Because everybody grew up from this world of mass communication, right? I'm not that old, but you have read your newspapers looking at mass communication, which is served for everybody. Then you went into digital newspaper, right? Then you went into micro-segmenting, right? So where you target a certain group of customers. Then you went to a macro-segmentations. Then you went into a one-to-one, which is next best offer. You go to Google, you get recommendation engine saying what needs to be done. But the context comes when it is real-time dynamic. And that's where these analogies do help you, because if somebody is calling into call center, if your agent is able to say, thank you, Mr. Raj, I know you were doing a POS transaction. I'm sorry it went wrong. We know where the problem is. So I don't need to explain the problem statement. It takes away that friction where the frustration a customer is calling it. You're getting back to business. And why would I still bank with the same bank? Because if I walk into a branch, or let's say the metaverse world, right? Even if I don't walk into the branch, and if the person knows who is he talking to, despite this population of 7 billion plus, So then I think that's where the context matters, right?
Right. Thank you for that, Rajesh. And Siew Kit, maybe getting your opinion as well. You manage operations environments in multiple areas. What does it mean to be data-driven from an operations perspective?
Yeah, thanks Ritin, and thanks Rajesh for introducing SIA, because 15 years I was actually working at SIA. So actually a bit of background. So 30 years in the aviation industry. My last job was at T5 Planning, right? So, and then recently, 1 year ago, I joined the maritime passenger space in Singapore Cruise Center. So I learned how to fly, and then after I've flown, now I learn how to swim, and still trying to stay afloat. But basically, at the end of the day, you know, all these 30 plus years, I'm more focused mainly from operational perspective, how data can be used to actually support data. And there are 4 pillars where data you know, is required, right? First of all, to really enhance operational effectiveness, efficiency on the ground. And how you use the data to optimize your resource deployment. And it's very key, right? Because manpower constraints is now being suffered. You go through Changi, you go through Europe, you can see all the bags all stacked up and all that stuff, right? So manpower is a really big issue, right? And thirdly is also 911 create, you know, this requirement, you know, to make sure that every one of us are safe and secure. And now with COVID-19, you're talking about hygiene, right? And lastly, very important, like Rajesh said, we need to make sure that our customer experiences are enhanced, right? So all this basically, if you use data and use data in the right way, you can actually help to assure, enhance, and optimize, right? So in the operational world, data becomes very important, right? In a sense that it's not only helping you to grow the top line, but also help you to reduce or manage your bottom line, right? Use cases of data in a data-driven operational environment. Well, basically, we use data to share, right? We need to share data and information across the ecosystem so that every one of us have a consistent picture of what's happening on the ground. So that if anything happens, right, you don't have to call one another. Basically, we really know what's happening on the ground, and very quickly, we actually be proactive, you know, to address to the situation on the ground to prevent a crisis and minimize inconveniences. And lastly, I want to talk about data-driven. What it means to us is you're talking about smart terminals, you're talking about digital twin, and very soon metaverse. So basically, we want to use the data to help us to better manage airports, ferry terminals, cruise terminals, so that, you know, us as a traveler, as a passenger, actually breeze through the terminals, the airports fairly quickly, so that we can catch our plane either to a destination or back home, and so on and so forth. Right? So data is going to be very important for us, and we are probably we've been hearing about using data for the past many years, but I think COVID has set us back, so we are basically restarting the journey again. And hopefully, 10 years down the road, and even in our T5 vision, we would basically have a digital twin to help us to manage a large, complex airport comprising of 5 terminals and able to manage up to about 130 million pax per annum. Right? So that's where data-driven is from an operation perspective.
Thank you very much. So there is Rajesh, like you said, the moment of truth when the service or product reaches a customer, how that experience is enabled by data. And Siew Kit, your comments around enabling the rest of the organization from an operations perspective to leverage data for decision making to support that so-called moment of truth with customer experience. And this is not obviously easy. That's just putting some markers for what being data-driven is. It's not an easy journey. And Juliana, maybe turning to you, you're currently leading a global digital acceleration initiative as well. What do you see as some of the challenges in getting to some of the states that both Rajesh and Siew Kit described?
I think I really like what Rajesh mentioned, right? Like the frictionless in the operation ground is what we actually endeavor to achieve as well. So being on the operation ground, you want to give a team a really operational perspective. And also, I think with the customer experience, right? When the customer dials in, what are the kind of experience that they will get, because you are then addressing them to the point as well. So what we see are the challenges are really the accessibility and also the autonomy of all this data, right? Although all this data are already residing in our backend, how do we ensure that we give the right access to the right people? And how is data really transparent, right? We don't want to overly expose our data, but how do we ensure that the technology is in, but do people really, I think, do they embrace the data is one thing as well. And there's too many facades of what the data story can tell you as well. So the other challenge that we often see is really the trust in data when we are presenting the data or when we're storytelling. It depends who is storytelling the data story as well. So the trust in data, and is there a kind of an overload of data as well? There's too much data points, and everybody is telling a different story. So who does the one who master weave the entire data together? So to us, I think in the digital acceleration space, what we also endeavor to do is really build a future-focused data strategy to ensure that everybody is looking at the data the same way that we are, so as to ascertain that we deliver the best experience for our customers.
Right. I really like what you said about the storytelling and the data. And I've heard that you tell me the story that you want, and I find the data that you need to tell the story. So there is a grain of truth in that. And there's also a lot of fragmentation from a data perspective. You spoke about trust in the data, in making sure that the narrative that you're telling is based on the right data. Siew Kit, you had a lot of experience from an IT application landscape data perspective as well. Do you have a perspective around this fragmentation from a data perspective, from a technology perspective as well?
Yes, I think based on my experience, basically all of us want to use data to solve our business problems and all this stuff. And what happened, it becomes a battle between a central IT and a citizen IT, right? A central IT basically is us IT, right? Want to build a super duper data warehouse, data lake, and public services so that everyone can access to our data and all the stuff. But then it's a different ambition by the business unit. They want to use data for their own needs, and they start to collect their own data. And then, like AWS Cloud, Azure Cloud, so easy to buy cloud resources, right? So just buy it themselves, and you have a lot of vendors out there who basically can sell you all the dashboards, visualization, and so on. So you have basically, business owners going their own, using their own data to come up with some insights, whereas IT is trying ourselves to basically sell our data lakes and all that stuff. So data fragmentation is actually very real in the organization, and that is probably one of the biggest challenges that we are facing now. How to bring everybody together under one roof, and how do we basically create a culture to really share data, right? To basically exchange data, to avoid duplication of work and effort, and also minimize this conflict of interest. And that is within the organization itself. Imagine an airport ecosystem. We have the airlines, the ground handlers, the engineering, the in-flight caterers, and the airport operators themselves. We want to share data, but because of confidential information, Singapore Airlines will not share their PAX information. Then how do we project, what could be the demand for arrival gates, arrival halls, or immigration counters, and so on. So I think the data fragmentation is really a big challenge, and how do we get around it? It will take time.
Right. And maybe switching gears a bit and taking off on this, it'll be good to get a sense for how the panel thinks about some of the solutions, some of the capabilities that are needed to address some of these areas. And Rajesh, you've led technology architecture and governance teams as well. And we've heard about cloud and environments where it's a hybrid environment. There are some workloads in the cloud and multi-cloud environments. Data is on-premise as well. So there's certainly a lot of fragmentation from that perspective. How do you look at the governance of the architecture that supports a data-driven organization?
Now, again, I think it's a good question, because generally if you're a CIO, head of tech, any material risk person from a financial perspective, you would sign up saying, I will keep the data safe, right? That's the first thing. The customers don't come because you've got a shiny branch office. They come to you because they trust you that you keep the money safe. So my job is not about the money. My job is about keeping the data, which transacts these things, to keep it safe, right? Let's use an LTA analogy, right? So somebody, given I'm an Australian bank, family's back in Sydney, so I was talking to a couple of friends and colleagues saying, oh, how come in Singapore I see so much high adoption of metro rates, but we still have a lot of cars being used in Sydney to commute? One, yeah, large scale, compared to Singapore. But there is a change in the culture, right? It is not a forceful change. If somebody says, yeah, I would rather take metro rather driving into, like to this convention center, is because of the convenience, accessibility, right? And what LTA does is building those guardrails, which enables you to say, I would actually go in a metro, or I take a bus, or rather drive my car, right? It's about how do you build the enablement. So if I take it back to a technology context, when I do an architecture governance, I split my table. My job is to enable a platform, whether it's my marketing guy, whether it is my FinCon, whether it's my compliance, whether it's my risk team, or whether it's my frontline sales guys. Can I create the channel that they can easily access the data? Because they are the owner of the data, so I make them as the domain owner. That's where we, I think, probably segue into in terms of the data products, because they become the owner of the data. My job is to enable a free flow of the data, right? And number two, I think in the previous panel we spoke about security, right? It's the prominent thing, right? How do I build security guardrail? MAS is pretty good and from a regulatory perspective, right? They rolled out, 644, now comes 655. It's no more guidelines. It's a legal obligation to ensure that I am trusting you to hold my data, right? It's not misused. My data is not abused, so that, so that way you need to build that convenience in terms of segregating, right? The last part is, how do I manage the data, right? I'm sure, like we were talking again, the CFOs, why do you carry 2 phones, 3 phones, right? And we buy a lot of these cloud storages from Google and everything, because the cost of storage has gone down. The cost of compute is like faster, right? Just because it's cheaper, you don't keep dumping your data in there, right? You dump the data that is really needed, you burn the data that's not needed, right? And you segregate the data into like 6 aspects, right? What's really core to my business? What's my master data, right? Doesn't change that frequently, right? You retain those data, right? What is my in-flight or transactional? That's why you use those event-driven architecture, right? So you use Kafka or use any other product for the matter of fact, saying, how do I use event-driven architecture for fast, real-time data set being made available in the front end, like the IVR example that I said. Then I think probably go after saying historical data. Because if my data scientist is trying to work on prediction models, right, and we want to move into, say, data as a service or a model as a service, how do you make more relevant data accessible to that person in terms of saying, hey, you know what, there's an historical data which helps him build the features around the data, which then you kind of provide whether marketing, sales, services, whatever it is, right? It's kind of getting through that, and last would be probably a snapshot data. Snapshot is more from saying, if I'm doing a payment transfer, I want to do an AML KYC check. Can I do it with a high-speed transfer, a snapshot check, and I need to retain this for auditability and for regulatory reasons. So if you're able to manage your data in a proper bucket and you can manage the life cycle of the data set, I think that does the job, right?
Right. Lots of themes in there, Rajesh, and lots of them to tease out. There's also the balance between the governance, the security, versus sometimes conflicting the need to democratize the data a little bit, make it more accessible, and would love to get some thoughts maybe in a subsequent follow-up as well. But Juliana, maybe turning to you, and I wanted to pick up on something that Siew Kit said. He mentioned about the Singapore Airlines example, if I may just pick on that, Siew Kit. And there is a ecosystem, right, of data providers. There's also SATs in there, the airport, the airline. And in your experience from a B2B perspective, you work with a lot of partners, and would you get your experience on how do you leverage that partner ecosystem to build that value chain view of the entire data?
I think really what I also enjoyed was like the previous panel, right? When we talk about leveraging on partners or relying on them, I think with that we are also looking to partner with value players that can really bring the value creation into the organization. And I think this value creation comes with experience as well, and over the understanding of the company business as well. So with the value partners that we bring in, when we actually try to string the data, put it actually into pieces that people can understand, I think what's more important is also how do we internally enable the organization, right, to be really data-driven as well. So while we bring in the partners to actually leapfrog where the gap of us is, I think the next phase for us was really to actually how do we build our workforce, our work team, to really close this gap so that in the next couple of years, hopefully in the next 12 to 24 months, we close the gap and enable the organization to move to a different space as well.
Thank you, Juliana. And I think we're getting a question from the audience here as well, which kind of ties in neatly. And this is around AI, ML, and automation capabilities in the context of being data-driven. And I guess the question is, and I'll read it out here, maybe you can show it up here, if it works. No, it isn't showing up on the screen, but I can read it out from here. And the question is, what is the biggest barrier for expanding AI ML adoption in your organization? And if you want to maybe expand on that a little bit into the role AI ML has to play, that would be fantastic. Siew Kit, do you want to take a lead into that?
Okay, yeah. So actually, ML, AI, automation, these are basically big buzzwords. But what it actually does is basically it's trying to make life easier for all of us, right, in a sense. So you have a lot of data. Rather than we as a human being actually go through line by line and make sense of it, so we're actually making these computing resources, probably in the cloud or wherever, to basically go through all this data, make sense of it, fuse it, make sense of it, give us some insights, and give us some directions and so on. So it's all about how to use data to augment decision making. I think that is very important in the airport space, right? Where basically we operate the whole airport, we have a lot of stakeholders and all the stuff. And if we have information about the queuing at let's say the queuing at the immigration queue, and you know that we have planes coming in with information about the load factors, how many are transferring, how many are actually going through immigration and so on. And if we have, let's say, a very good estimated time of arrival of the aircraft, where the gates will be allocated to the aircraft and all that stuff. So all these are a lot of data, but how do we now make use of machine learning, make use of advanced analytics, right? To basically fuse all this data together to give us a very good insight into what I call the queuing situation for the queuing congestion or congestion situation at the various touch points in the next 2 hours. And with those information, you can actually now fill resources, or I can reassign the resources so that I can park the aircraft further away, or I can balance the use of the immigration piers and all that stuff. So this is something that is not theory. This is something that we are really doing it in the last few years, trying to use data to help us to basically reduce the waiting time at immigration counters, at taxi queues. Changi Airport is very good at trying to get you a taxi ahead of time. Well, today there's a challenge, right? But basically, we use data from sensors, we use data from airlines, we use data from ground handling or whatever, right? And over the years, hopefully, we have sufficient data, then basically we can get the engine to relearn so that it takes in consideration, whether it is a Monday or is it a weekend or is it a public holiday, because different days of the month, different days of the year will have different demand, different supply and all that stuff, right? So that's basically applying a kind of AI to it. Okay. In terms of automation capabilities, just now I talked about manpower, right? Today, do you know that behind the scene, when they load and unload an aircraft, it's very human intensive, right? So there are opportunities to put in autonomous robotics on the apron. And of course, the goal at the end of the day, I always say, can we be like a Formula One pit, right? By the aircraft comes in and straight away I have all the robots and autonomous vehicles going in to load and unload the aircraft and so on and so forth. And this basically requires a lot of data, right? Okay. So I would say that from a capability point of view, it's not only the people, the process, the technology, but there's a lot of mindset change on how to share data so that we can maximize the use of it, to operate the airport effectively.
Juliana, did you want to come in as well?
Yeah, so I wanted to take it probably a notch down away from the airplanes, right? So I see the audience, a lot of you are wearing glasses and spectacles. So at ESSILORLUXOTTICA, I think we actually manufacture all your lenses, right? So I think the challenge for us is that anytime when you're manufacturing your lenses, I think the question that you always ask your optometrist is, when can I collect my glasses, right? And the optometrist will tell you like, oh, I do not know, I'll just give you like maybe a standing 7 days. So what we have done in the back end was actually leveraging on all this data. And instead of putting like a fixed rule engine to tell you like, okay, this is the number of days that the lens takes to manufacture. And do you know like when manufacturing your lens, sometimes it breaks, sometimes it cracks, and sometimes there are scratches. So that's when the turnaround time actually changed again as well, right? Mm-hmm. So what we have done is using machine learning to understand the data coming from our different labs. So we operate in about 180 countries. Right. Our labs actually operate in more than 20 countries. And with that, all the lenses actually are coming in from different labs, depending on the location of the optometrist. So by using this data, we actually tell probably a better story to actually regenerate of how how soon the lens is coming to you as well. The second thing that we also have done on this AI side of things is also to do very similar if how you are doing your food ordering these days. When you are doing probably your food ordering, you will tell you like what is the most ordered food that you make. And they will always give you the kind of recommendation, the kind of ranking. So what we have also done with our optometrists is to enable them to skip a number of steps in placing the orders. Is to telling them like, okay, these are the type of lens that you always order. So by that, they could actually select the choices and actually skip like maybe 10 questions to actually place the lens order easily. I think the beauty behind it is actually for our customers who are coming into the industry, the young optometrists. They might not understand the eye care industry very well, but we are trying to allow them to cross that chasm in learning all these difficult technical jargons as well.
All right, right. And you know, for these capabilities, maybe Rajesh, you could come in. You know, from a CIO perspective, what does it take to deliver some of these experiences that Juliana and Siew Kit described from an AI perspective, and what are the pushes and pulls for the CIO there?
So again, as Siew Kit said, it's a buzzword. So you say AI ML, they get scared. And number two, when you talk about AI ML, CFO thinks it's too expensive. If I talk to my chief exec, because we're into institutional banking, they said, mate, my arms can sell more business than using your AI ML, right? That's the time I need to wear my doctoral student hat, right? And break it down into simple pieces for them. Tell them into, okay, you don't need to think about the complex AI ML. You can treat this into 3 segments. One is mechanical AI. Everybody's used to mechanical AI, right? So I started my career from a manufacturing plant. So you know what it means by automation. You know what it means by using a chatbot. You know what it means by robotic process automation. So those kind of things. Anything that you're doing manual, it's boring. You don't like to do it. It's mundane. Doesn't make you happy turning up the office. Can I use RPA? Can I automate something? Great, right? Gives you some time back. Whether you're marketing, FinCon, compliance, front office, doesn't matter, right? They all love it. They say, yeah, I think this is great. Can I make information made more available for thinking? The next layer comes the analytical and thinking layer, right? Are you kind of struggling like 3 days? Like if I go to my product guys or the pricing guys, they spend days together, trying to jig together, work out a perfect deal because we enter derivatives, restructuring, refinancing. So how long does it take for you to give a price to a corporate or an institutional customer? Oh, we'll probably spend about 5 days, 10, 15 days. Can I reduce it down to, let's say, a day? Right? You don't have to do the thinking. The thinking has already been done. You do the decision making, right? So that's the next layer. It's like, wow, this is good. I like AI ML, right? The third part is when you talk about feeling AI, right? That's when it's a little skeptical. Can I predict something saying, where's Raj leading to, right? Going that step forward, touching the human element. That's when they're a little skeptical, saying, does the regulation allows us to do it? Can I go into that space? Am I intruding into somebody's privacy, right? Guess what? Let's keep it away, right? Futuristic thing. Let's just focus on things that we can control. Yeah. We know the regulation pretty clear, documented. We understand the law of the land. Perfect, right? So then the adoption is easier. But when I throw in the bigger buzzword, they don't want to have a conversation.
Right? Well, thank you for that perspective. And maybe wanted to explore one more angle. And something you said earlier, data-driven initiatives in an organization are typically long-term strategies. As you put in place data ecosystems, if you're doing an ERP rationalization, that in itself is a long-term investment, building a data lake, getting all your source systems in. These are long-term initiatives and plans. And you had a discussion with the CFOs in the next room. These require multi-year budgetary support as well. So how does the CIO today measure the value and the success of these data-driven initiatives to justify ongoing investments? And perhaps it would be good to hear from your experiences. What are those measures of success that you look to, your North Star, to see whether your data-driven program is on track? And maybe Juliana, starting with you, what's your experience been? What do you look for?
I think for us, we look for organization change, really. So I think successful organization, I think when we are leveraging on data, we actually looked at the entire organization is using this data to really make a decision driven, right? So they are data decision driven, and I think this replaces for a lot of gut feel. So when we are operating globally, I think our challenge is always that we are not there on the ground. a lot of our guys out there on the ground, I think we struggle to understand what is the challenges and also the cultural difference as well. So these data are telling us a different story. And with this data and also with the ground experience from our guys, we are able to piece together information, replacing what we call gut feeling with facts and also maybe assumptions as well of how we should actually build a different data strategy as well. I think the second thing that we also really focus on is to be really outcome-driven as well. The reason of being outcome-driven is typically data can tell too much insights. And I think there could be times where we are too microscopic in telling like which are the data that is wrong, but we forgot that maybe we should take a step back and look at the macro level of what is this story telling you as well. And coming back to my earlier point is really how do we string all these insights together to build this ecosystem approach and to actually enable the entire value chain to see the same story. So really storytelling the entire data insights.
Thank you. Did you want to come in as well, Rajesh, on this?
I think it's more from a measure perspective, there are three aspects, right? If there is like if you're talking to the board or you're talking to your CEOs or your chief exec, they'll say, Raj, will the data enable, what's the ROTI or my ROI in terms of the investment that I'm putting in? So that's the first thing. You talk to the board to say, can your data, does not expose us too much, right? Can you ensure it's a risk-free, right? Can we ensure we are compliant? And we also ensure the third thing in terms of value, right? What's the value, kind of give it back to the customer. But if I see from my lens, from a CIO perspective or head of tech, would be how long does it take for me to prepare the data to make it available to the data scientists, to enable those features and provide the service to the frontline team, right? What's the life cycle or how long does it take? What is my cost in terms of storage, processing, ETL, enabling to have the data prepared to consume it in the front, right? And you kind of piecemeal, and the third would be in terms of auditability, right? If tomorrow somebody wants to audit everything that I've done, okay, how much am I prepared to present it? What percentage of my data set is actually auditable? If there is an external or internal auditors who turns up, yes, I can do it. So it's more about trying to say, what is we call that as mean time to make a data available to whether it is a data scientist team or to the end user of the data. So how long does it take to make it available? So you need to have some measure. Today we don't so aggressively track. We look at saying, what's the ROI? Because previously I used to work on the consumer side of banking, where the more focus was about next best offer, right? Everybody wants to go and say, okay, if you go to a coffee shop, sell a credit card, I tap on the POS machine, can I give you a next best offer, right? So is there a value in it from a business perspective also for the customer?
Right. So there are business measures which could be revenue related, incremental gain from using data. There could be governance, regulatory related, audit, risk, and there could be operational measures of mean time. You mentioned mean time to get the data available. So those would be some things that you would look at. Fantastic. We've got one last question coming up. Not sure how much time we've got left. I'm not seeing too many more questions on Slido. And I'm getting the signal to wrap up. So maybe very quickly as we finish up, if you could get some very brief comments from each one of the panelists. And it's a very vast topic, but could you just share maybe some learnings of there was one initiative which is top of mind for you right now from a data-driven perspective? Would be great to hear that.
So I think, don't want to take too much time, but everybody says data is the new oil, data is the new gold. What do we do with oil and gold, right? Use it responsibly. And we want to get rid of, there's more discussion in the boardroom with the CXO about sustainable of any work that we're doing from a technology perspective, how you're ESG compliant. I think data is also the same thing, how responsibly you handle others' data because you've been entrusted.
Right.
That would be my view.
Responsible use of data?
Responsible use of data.
Fantastic. Siew Kit, do you want to go next?
Okay, quick one is basically that data are being used effectively on how to manage operations at airport, and that's why Changi Airport is number one, right? And don't forget behind it, to complicate data now, IT and operational data, right? Our OT. And lastly is standardization. I think all of us need to adopt standards, not only from an IT point of view, but also from an OT point of view.
Right, so adopting standards from an IT and OT perspective.
Yes, correct.
Thank you. Juliana?
So for me, I think we use three metrics that we actually constantly measure against. Is the behavioral change within the organization in terms of handling data, the analytics performance, how clean the data is, and how up-to-date the data is. And the last point that we actually measure against is the business performance as well. The value of the data that actually brings towards driving the business performance.
Right, so focus on the outcomes and the measurability of the data-driven organization. Great, thank you very much. Would like to thank the panel for the experience. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this wonderful, insightful discussion, our esteemed panelists and moderator.